This is my sixth video in my series over a brief history of Germany, and this time I'm going to be talking about the Weimar Republic from 1918 to 1933, which was essentially a majority of the interwar period between World War I and World War II, which set the stage for Hitler's rise to power and also was the first true German democracy. First off, I want to mention the German miracle, which was in the earlier period of the Weimar Republic, and in this instance, following World War I, Germany was extremely crippled. They had a very weak military and forced to be weaker than Belgium itself, had extreme financial burdens with the different reparations they had to pay, as well as other factors that caused hyperinflation, which would then link to coups and and extreme polarization in politics, such as the rise of communism in the country that had to be put down by force. However, in the later half of the 1920s, nicknamed the Golden 20s in Germany, they recovered. They rejoined the international community in 1924. They recovered their economy very swiftly, becoming one of the most dominant economic powers in all of Europe, despite their recent defeat, and also accepting majority of the Versailles Treaty, which reestablished themselves with other nations in Europe. However, the Great Depression that would then come in 1929 meant that this would come to a swift end. This then leads into the rise of Nazism, as well as Adolf Hitler. The Great Depression was disastrous on the Weimar Republic, as it was with most of the world, except for pretty much communist countries that weren't in the worldwide market. Starting from 1929, unemployment skyrocketed as political turmoil and discontent rose as well throughout the entire nation. This was only made worse by Chancellor Brunings, who was appointed by President Hindenburg, who was the president for most of this period, so he's very important to know. Chancellor Brüning was the first one appointed during the emergency of the Great Depression, but he tried to achieve deflation, which made unemployment worse, so then he had to get even more desperate. With the rise of Adolf Hitler's influence and power, and this is in a nutshell, basically, of his rise. It was very complicated, but he was very successful. In 1933, Hindenburg would appoint Hitler as the new chancellor with the rising popularity of the Nazi Party. In March, in a perceived state of emergency, Hitler was granted even more power beyond the parliament. And I want to highlight here what these different acts that Hindenburg took. One of them was after the burning of the Reichstag, which was basically the leading government building in the country in 1933. And then that meant that Hindenburg would decree, essentially notice that the civil rights and the political rights of pretty much everybody in the country would be suspended temporarily because of the fear that a political ideology and all these differences were essentially perpetrating a lot of these crimes. This meant that Hitler could essentially get rid of any political opponents he wanted without interrupting the actual technical legal system of the country at the time. In addition to this, it was also granted a lot more power that literally granted him influence beyond the parliament. He could enact laws beyond just the parliament itself. He could be able to skip the parliament, which is something he wasn't able to do before. He could essentially do whatever he wanted without interruption from the parliament or Hindenburg himself, which meant that in 1933, in March, around that time, Hitler essentially took full control, even if technically he was only chancellor, where after that he was able to assert dominance and essentially consolidate the state into his liking. This is a very brief overview of the Weimar Republic and its importance, and how it leads into Adolf Hitler despite their success relatively during the time period, with the Great Depression causing a lot of this.